Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. Before I get to introduce Gayle, just a few things going by here. This is a talk that will take place, Adam Dagnall and Linda Soka, next week. And somewhere a little bit later will be a talk called It's Not Easy Being Green, Environmental Engagement in the Past and Present. So a lot of times we get wonderful natural scientists, social scientists, and engineers talking. But this will be a talk 2 weeks from today by Mark McLaughlin, who is an environmental historian and a Canadian historian, who's relatively new on the faculty here. We've had a wonderful, amazing faculty member, Dick Judd, who's now emeritus and probably right now driving across the country to Santa Cruz for reasons I can tell you about later. But anyway, Mark's kind of the new Dick Judd in some ways, which is big shoes to fill, doing very interesting work, so it's going to be fun to have him here as well. Another thing to see going by in a second is the fact that we try once a semester to not have a kind of talk by one person, but what we call student lightning talks, real short talks. Often some of the most interesting things, just because there's a kind of seeing the connections between students and the way they're approaching sustainability research is really fascinating. So that's coming up. A prize for whoever can see a picture of Gayle in that slide, working on something that I'll mention in a sec. So the abstracts that students need to submit, and this is it, they're due a week from this Friday, and Gayle's over there probably worrying about where fish are swimming in tidal turbines. And there's another kind of turbine that birds worry about. So anyway, if you're a student or you know students or you're mentoring students, please spread the word about that. It's pretty fun. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Gayle Zydlewski. I guess I met Gayle pretty quickly after I arrived here back in 2006, been a while, and it was immediately apparent that she just was a really outstanding fish ecologist. And one of the contexts in which I learned more about her strong background was that there was a lot going on 12 years ago as the plans for the dam removals on the Penobscot were advancing. So a bunch of people got together to think about what kind of research was needed so that it turns out that when you remove a dam and river, it's not completely clear what's going to happen to these sort of complex interconnected ecosystems. And that was certainly true in this setting. By the way, if you've forgotten where you are, you're on an island in the middle of the Penobscot River, and fish are more or less swimming by in both directions, more or less. This was viewed as a great opportunity. There's folks from NOAA here who know way more about this than I do, but we thought this was a great opportunity. But I can tell you, having studied dam removals all over the world, that this often happens and nobody's there to see what changes. And so Gayle and others, together with partners from NOAA and lots of other researchers in New England, set about creating a baseline of information about physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of ecosystems so that when the dams did get removed, about 5 years ago, then we'd have a chance to see how this works as a method for river restoration. And my sense, there's a couple competitors, but my guess is this is going to be the best studied dam removal on the planet. And Gayle's work is just a piece of that. She's worked on a lot of different species, worked on eel way back for her dissertation. She's well known for studying sturgeon in this system and elsewhere. Anytime I haven't told you this story, but I was somewhere with someone who was kind of fascinated by the kind of things people do here, and I was talking about your work on sturgeon, and he wanted to know who you were, and so I told him, but I said, well, we just call her the Sturgeon General, which is the easiest laugh I ever get. But that's honorific, believe me. Gayle knows a lot. Very quickly after that, we got a $20 million grant to launch something that was called the Sustainability Solutions Initiative that led to the creation of the Mitchell Center. And in that, she and colleagues led a really interesting project looking at tidal energy, which is what she's doing in that picture. And it expanded in really important ways right up to the present. One is that it led to international collaborations both in Japan, in the Canadian Maritimes. But we had a team of about, I guess, 100 faculty and a lot of students who were all trying to figure out how an economist and a sociologist and a fish biologist and a hydrologist could work together in this kind of space. And Gayle's project, together with Teresa Johnson and a lot of other great folks, became a kind of model for successful interdisciplinary collaboration and stakeholder engagement. In fact, I heard Gayle give a talk in this room about a year ago when she was interviewing for her current position as director of Sea Grant, where she talked a little bit about that experience and how it helped her think about other leadership roles she wanted to play. So the only other thing I'll say is we try to get people to give catchy titles for their talks. And so we asked Gayle, hey, you got anything? And to be honest, I didn't have any good ideas. And Gayle said, well, does anybody else have a good idea? And so where is Bree back there? Yeah, so Bree Berry in the back was the one who came up with the catchy title of the semester, Let's Get Engaged. Please join me in welcoming Gayle.
So there's the catchy title that Bree helped with. So thank you all for coming, and I'm just thrilled to be here. And as David said, the last time I gave a talk here, I was interviewing, so it's a little bit more comfortable today. So I'm happy to talk with you about some of the work that David brought up in terms of work that I did within the Sustainability Solutions Initiative, and also how that's kind of really changed my thinking about what I am interested in doing in Maine, and really led me to this position with Maine Sea Grant. So before I get started, I know a lot of you in the room, but I was hoping that, especially for the people I don't know, you could tell me, and by just raising your hand, how many of you consider yourself a researcher? All right, that's what I anticipated, that most people would think of themselves as a researcher. So I'd like to kind of use that and think about, towards the end of this, how I could maybe help you or have you think a little bit about how your research may be applicable to Maine people and how Sea Grant goes about to do those things. So what David and Ruth so nicely gave kind of a list of what you might think about when you put together your sustainability talk. So these are, and I know I'm putting it right out there because I'm a very analytical person and I like to follow the rules. So the sustainability problems, as David already alluded to, are inherently interdisciplinary. So I'll be talking about some of that work that I've done previously and how that fits into Maine Sea Grant's work. And then consider the following items, which are a focus on solutions, ways for disciplines to work together, knowledge co-production, and then a couple of themes. And I'll touch on how all of these things have come into work, mostly for Maine Sea Grant, but I will also talk a bit about the interdisciplinary research I did around tidal power development. And bear with me for those of you who have heard the story before, but I'll give a little bit of lessons learned as I step through that. And then when I transition to talking more about Maine Sea Grant, I'll introduce you to our mission and the network that we have available to us, who we are, how we do our work in Maine, and then how we solve problems, sustainability issues with people in our coastlines, and how that brings us full circle to thinking about research opportunities. So sustainability problems, one of which I was involved with and still am involved with actually is in the development of tidal power. And as David alluded to, I'm really by training a fish ecologist, so I tackle this from the perspective of what will happen to fish and their ecosystems as we may develop a very a nice alternative to fossil fuel energy. But part of the solution, or thinking about solutions, are identifying where the problems need to be addressed. And so in doing that, when we tackled this work around tidal power development, we asked the questions, who will be affected and who are the decision makers in some of that work? So we really wanted to focus on those questions. But if you were at my interview talk, I gave the kind of a joke of two engineers walked into the office of a fish biologist. And so there are engineers on campus thinking about tidal power development, and they came to me and said, well, we know we need to get a license to put these things in the water, but what does this mean to fish? So that's the first response most fish biologists would have, is that, well, you know, it seems pretty detrimental, but what can we do to think about what fish will do around a tidal power device? There are different opportunities, and they're different than hydropower devices, for example. So we asked the question, well, who are the decision makers? Who will be providing the license? Because we can tackle this from a very basic research perspective, but maybe we need to know who else will need the data that we're collecting to make decisions associated with tidal power development. So the answer to that question is the first agency involved is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission needed to be able to provide a license for power to be provided to the grid for tidal power. If that were to occur, they have to consult with various other agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries, as well as state agencies, to provide legal license for a device to go in the water. So we wanted any of the research that we conducted to be applicable to these decision makers as they were thinking about providing a permit for a device to go in the water. So when we started asking questions about what will happen to fish, we sat down with regulators from NOAA Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife and the state agencies, actually collectively, to ask, what data can we collect that would help you answer questions that might provide a license to tidal power development in Maine. The other thing and I'm not going to give you all the answers to these because I simply don't have enough time, but I'll give you some resources that you can go back and look at some of these things on. But the other piece that should come to mind to you is who else might be affected by this, and the coastal communities, where these devices would be going. If you start thinking about, I mentioned fish and fish ecology and fish ecosystems, there are people that fish in these communities. How might they be affected by this? So we wanted to make sure that any of the information that we collected could be beneficial to those coastal communities as well. And really this provides what we call social license. So along with the fact that the regulators, and I didn't mention Ocean Renewable Power Company was the company developing tidal power, they wanted to make sure, number one, they needed to get a license to get in the water, but number two, they wanted to make sure coastal communities were okay with the way they did that work. So I think these are two very vital ways of approaching a research question or developing a solution to a problem like developing tidal power. So one of the things that was asked is to consider focusing on solutions and effective ways for disciplines to work together. MTPI in the center of this graphic is the Maine Tidal Power Initiative. So when we started our research, we started by having an engineering team, a resource assessment team, a fish assessment team, and human dimensions team. All very different disciplines that asked questions in very different ways. So I'd say from the beginning, we started as a very multidisciplinary group, all tackling questions very differently. And the way that we effectively work together is literally sitting in a room together every week and learning each other's language. Because there were some words that were sent around the room that meant very different things to a biologist than they did to an engineer. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand what kind of objectives and questions each of these separate individual disciplines were trying to tackle. And then eventually over time became a pretty interdisciplinary group, and I'd even say some of our work kind of veered or became more transdisciplinary, where we were blending opportunities across different disciplines to ask questions that were helpful for developing tidal power. So just the engineering team started with, what is a device? How do you actually build one? Then we had a resource assessment team looking at how much power was there in the tides in the area we were looking at. My team was looking at where are fish distributed around a tidal power device. And the human dimensions team were talking to the fishermen, asking what information do you need to understand or be okay with tidal power being developed in your community. And this was all funded with various different resources from the Department of Energy. SSI was pivotal in keeping our work going. And I think one of the principles that we used in this work is all of the people involved from all of the different disciplines felt strongly that everyone were funded at the same level. So very commonly, the social science work gets short shrift on some of the work that's done. Our human dimensions team was receiving as much funding as our engineering and fish assessment and resource assessment team. We found that to be a really important piece of our work, is that everybody was treated pretty equivalently. Of course, down the line, everybody was finding different pots of money. But when we had one big pot of money, we shared it equally, and that was really important to our work. So we had a strong science base. We had multiple projects that came out of the fish assessment work. There were publications from the resource assessment and engineering work. And I'm really just going to point you to some resources here. So as David mentioned, Jessica Janswitz and Teresa Johnson did a lot of work looking at how might information that we were collecting in these other disciplines actually be used for permitting decisions. So this has been looked at from a human dimensions perspective. And finally, I'll point you to this paper, which is a paper in sustainability science, which describes the work that we did and really analyzes how we did the research around, the original research around tidal power development in Maine. So some of this also touches on another issue that was brought up and really important to sustainability research is the co-production of knowledge. So when we were doing our work on and this kind of gets into the interdisciplinary, more transdisciplinary work that we started, it was looking at where are fish in this ecosystem? We asked that question, but we went to the fishermen and actually sat down with the fishermen and said, how would you go about doing this work? How can we best structure and design our study to collect information based on what they knew about those ecosystems? And that became pivotal to the work that we did over a several-year period. And that engaged the public into the research and really got them interested in what we were doing and how we went about doing that and providing information back to them. And I'll mention here that this was all made possible by Chris Bartlett from Maine Sea Grant Extension. So when we were starting our work in Eastport, Maine, we knew that, well, I was a researcher in Orono, and I didn't know anything about Eastport. So the first thing that I did is I contacted Chris. I had heard about extension agents around the state, and Chris put us in touch with fishermen who could help us do our work on the water, but then helped us engage with the fishermen around other issues that they'd be interested in associated with our research. So it really took the work that we were doing, and to me it made a difference to the people there in that community to hear from us. So this is something that it really was pivotal in terms of my research experiences, in terms of engaging the public and making that a piece of our research and then giving back. So again, it informed our research, but we also continued to go back, and I actually I'm supposed to be there tomorrow, but with the weather, it's all things are changing. So, but we continue to do our research in Eastport, and the fishermen and other community members are engaged in that research. So I encourage you to look at some of this work, but our transdisciplinary work enabled credibility with partners, informed decision makers, resulting in power going to the grid. We were able to work together to find diversified funding sources, and we ultimately had national and international recognition. We integrated across our disciplines to really come up with a transdisciplinary approach to some of our research. And being innovative really helped us to be able to engage the public and gain some respect and understanding in that community to move that research forward. And I guess I end with, that's me standing in front of a chart with the fishermen who we still work with today. But really thinking across these disciplines and engaging people is really what Sea Grant is about. And that's why I'd like to move into, this is a team that we had that worked around Maine Tidal Power Initiative. But really this type of work is typified by the way Sea Grant does their work. So I put up here the mission. This is the Maine Sea Grant mission to support the responsible use and conservation of coastal resources to sustain thriving coastal communities and ecosystems. It's really about providing information to the people in the coastal communities to make a difference in those areas. And I just want to point out the network that Maine Sea Grant has available to it. So Maine Sea Grant is one of 33 nationwide Sea Grant college programs, and there really is a network of people. And I in September I was able to go to what's called Sea Grant Week and meet a whole lot of these people, and it's incredibly exciting to see the passion around really making a difference in coastal communities around the nation. So the National Sea Grant mission is very similar to the one I just read to you. So ours comes from the broader national mission. And the way we function has three different pillars: research, extension, and education. I'll talk a bit about all of these. I've already touched on research a bit, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. But there is a network. There are networks of people who are working in these areas. There are research coordinators, extension leaders, and education leaders, as well as communication leaders across the nation that our staff in Maine has at their fingertips and works very closely with to think about these issues from a nationwide perspective as well as from a Maine perspective. So I just wanted to mention that Maine Sea Grant is not an independent. We have a very large network of people and ideas to draw upon that all really kind of build into the sustainability questions and solutions in coastal areas. The focus areas for National Sea Grant are environmental literacy and workforce development, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, healthy coastal ecosystems, and resilient communities and economies. And I bring up here or remind you some of these words are those words that David said, where do you use these in your themes? And really, they're embedded in everything that Sea Grant does. So again, resiliency, sustainability, and actually looking at fisheries and aquaculture, we look at those together and thinking about ways they interact with one another. So I'm going to start with research as with one of the functional areas of Sea Grant, and just kind of give you an overview. Some of the things that I've learned to appreciate since I started as director, and didn't really understand totally, is that I understand this, but wanted to just kind of put out there that I didn't really completely understand the fact that our NOAA funding actually comes to the Maine Sea Grant office and 40% of it goes out the door. So our Maine Sea Grant receives a chunk of money with through an omnibus appropriation, and 40% of that is meant to go out the door to other researchers. So researchers statewide to conduct research on coastal issues that research can be brought back to the people on the ground. So 40% of our budget is dedicated to funding research within our focus areas, those that I mentioned. The way we do this is we have biennial research calls. Watch January, there'll be one coming up, so keep that in mind. There's approximately $250,000 will go out the door for that biennial call. Will be over a 2-year period. And we also have program development funds, so there's smaller awards that we do every year, twice a year. One of the calls just closed, so if you have a great nugget of an idea you want to kind of build on for a larger opportunity, take a look at our program development opportunities. And NOAA Sea Grant nationally has multiple initiatives that open up depending on the focus for various different years. Last year and this coming year, there have been national aquaculture initiatives. There's a large appropriation at the national level to increase the research around aquaculture. So that's something to watch for. And additional opportunities could come up as appropriations get set, hopefully on December 7th. And I want to point out some of our staff to you too. So Lynn, you probably, if you've received any research funds, you know Lynn Wardwell. And also Kathy Burrell, who's in our front office as well. So I wanted to ask here, how many people, you're here for a sustainability talk, doesn't mean you work on coastal problems. So how many people in the room are doing research on coastal problems? Great. So my next question, I'm going to let you take a minute and maybe people can shout out how they do this, is how do you generate your research questions? So maybe take a minute, and if you're moved by the spirit, perhaps you can shout out how you generate your questions. John.
We engaged the Department of Marine Resources and, in our case, shellfish harvesters in the coastal areas for input on what gaps in information keep them from management solutions that they're looking for.
Great. So people help inform your research questions.
Absolutely.
Great. Anyone else? Joe?
Yeah. I've worked once and still work with people in state government, and there are questions that trickle down or fall hard from the legislature and go, what are we going to do with this?
Yeah.
And they can be translated, and they have to be, into scientific questions that they can be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then delivered back to those folks.
Typically,
yeah.
yes. Yeah, they'd
Some
like
way.
that.
Yeah. So those are all, they're challenging because, like you said, some of those need to be translated one way or the other or both. So I just wanted everybody to think about where you get your research questions as you're developing research opportunities. So this brings me into who we are and how we do our work. And when I say we, I'm talking about Maine Sea Grant. I already mentioned to you the 4 main focus areas for the National Sea Grant. And we add a 5th, which is preparing for climate change. So these are the focus areas for Maine Sea Grant, and this is the team. So, and actually Lynn's missing in this picture, but I'm going to bring up some of these folks and let you see what everybody's doing. So again, our functional areas are research, extension, and education. And I put extension large here because our marine extension team is really a big focus of what we do. Education is a piece of that. Research is a piece of that, for that matter. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our extension team and then how important communications is within that extension team and the things that we do for reaching out to, again, Maine's people. So this is our marine extension team. We have a cooperation with Cooperative Extension, and I put this up here because maybe some of you know it, but Chris Bartlett is our easternmost representative in Eastport, and then Kristen Grant is in Wells at the Wells Reserve. And I don't put up the years; those are not the years they were born, and I don't put them up there for them to feel like they're aging them in any way. I put them up there because I want you to see that these are people in our coastal communities. They live in these communities. They know these communities, and they actually work very closely in these communities to understand what they need, what they are interested in, and what their potential needs are. So collectively, I think I added up more than 100 years of experience there. And I think on average it's about 17 years. These people, they've been living in these communities. So I'm going to ask you another question. So when I say Marine Extension Team, what is extension to people? What does extension mean? Extension. Does anybody have a good definition for extension?
Sure. How to get to some people who live in the coast, but somebody who's connected. In other words, they're a point person to connect to groups or individuals on the coast that, as a scientist, you might want to meet.
So extending the reach to somewhere. Yep. Any other thoughts?
So aren't there some people who think that what extension people do is they translate
Mm-hmm.
or do outreach? They take kind of research results, say from a university, and kind of take it out to the unwashed, although I guess on the coast they would be washed. Anyway, but I'd be interested to know if you think that's, not everybody thinks that's the right way to think about it.
No, I think that is a great way to think about it. So taking research that we do potentially here at UMaine or other research institutions in Maine and bringing them to the people on the coast. Yeah. So those actually. So I've found that it's not that easy, and people do extension in different ways, to be honest. So the definition can be a little bit broad, and so the way that this is from the National Sea Grant perspective. So Sea Grant has about 500 extension agents on the ground, and again, they are in the communities that they serve, and they are considered to be honest brokers of information, so non-advocacy facilitators, essentially, of science-based information to residents for their needs in those communities, and transferring those research priorities from those communities back to researchers. So really, there's this two-way street. We have people living in these communities who can give us information on what research is needed there. But the research that we do, we can extend to those communities as well. So these are numbers that are on the National Sea Grant site. These were just for 2017. the volunteer hours, communities improved, and individuals reached through workshops. So again, some of the idea of having workshops and providing information out to those communities are the types of things that Extension does. So the folks that we have in Maine, really what they do are epitomized by the things that David and Ruth asked me to talk about, which are they focus on solutions, they use effective ways to think across disciplines, they apply knowledge co-production and these various themes, and they are the honest brokers in these communities. So what I did when I was pulling this together is I asked some of the Extension staff, how would you answer these questions? How do you do these things? So I really have a series of quotes from them that may be lessons learned in thinking about doing sustainability science. So this is Chris Bartlett, and you can see, I don't know if you noticed in the previous slide where I showed him, but actually I'm going to bring it up in a second. We don't just pose these pictures with the Maine Sea Grant logo. People are really proud of wearing these things, and whenever you see Chris, you probably see him with his Maine Sea Grant hat on. But anyway, this is Chris Bartlett. He's done a lot of work in Eastport from Machias, a lot of work down east with various different aspects of community needs. A lot of his work started with the salmon aquaculture in that region. So he was really a finfish specialist, but over time, he became, again, embedded in that community. If you saw his, I think his time horizon was in the 90s when he started, and he's helped solve or think about problems all over the board for that community, from fisheries, aquaculture, and energy development as well. I have a picture of Alewife here because he does some work around working with the town. When they were going to lose the license for their Alewife run, he helped do some monitoring that helped them be able to sustain that run. So I asked them again, what would you think about in terms of is helpful in terms of moving solutions-oriented work into solutions-oriented directions? And I know these are small. I'm just going to hit the highlights on these, but what Chris said is to start by focusing research on stakeholder expressed needs. Knowing something or learning about local knowledge is important, and nurturing relationships. It was funny, just before here I went, if anybody knows that we're hiring a new dean for cooperative extension, and she was interviewing, and she said the best thing that extension does is build relationships. And so I was thrilled that I was hearing the same thing that I was going to be saying here. So again, it's those relationships that the extension staff really pull together in terms of coming up with solutions to problems in our coastal communities. Really, for co-production practices, it's about being a good listener. Again, if you think that this links back to the tidal power work we did, we as researchers sat down with one another and listened hard to try to understand how each of our language was different across disciplines. So again, also understanding each other's roles, so communicating early and often, who's doing what in a research project, for example. Another question was, what are ways to effectively work together across disciplines? And Chris's bottom line, he said that his bottom line is that make sure that people's basic needs are met. And you could read through this, and this will come up later, provide refreshments. And make sure people are okay. One of the things that Chris, I didn't put up here, is that Chris gave an example when he was working with the shellfish community. Some people are uncomfortable with certain situations, and if you're in a community, there may even be, if you hand out things that you're expecting people to read, that could be difficult for people. So having different opportunities for communicating information verbally as well as in written form is really important. Again, kind of the basics of what people need in a conversation. And finally, using the themes of resilient scale, knowledge co-production, and boundary spanning. I think the sentiment of Chris's comment was, these are all great for framing these things, but Chris's point was that 10 years ago he wasn't thinking about them in those terms. So it's really about these other pieces of bringing people together and really understanding what they need to come up with solutions. Does anybody know Dana Morse? Dana is big in aquaculture. He's done a lot of work on the coast, again, about 20 years with the Marine Extension Team. one of the big things that Dana and others with multiple partners is aquaculture and shared waters is a program that has been used, implemented to help fishermen think about diversifying their options, economic options on the coast. So we know that fisheries are in changing conditions, and so a group of folks got together, one of them being Dana, and came up with a curriculum for fishermen to think about moving into aquaculture. Now, I think 5 or 6 years ago, that was taboo. And since that time, and really thinking and talking with these communities, I think we've had more than 100 fishermen move into doing some form of aquaculture. So it's really made a difference in those communities and thinking about what can make a difference for them. Another thing that Dana's done is this is a picture of 2 scallops. This is a technology that's used in Japan. They're hanging scallops on lines to grow them out to marketable size. So this is something that Dana learned. It's research that he's taken, technology transfer from Japan, and brought it to Maine. Actually, this week he's doing folks are visiting from Japan to see how this is moving along. And so there's a lot of research, again, coming down into the communities, coastal communities. And with our communications team, there's multiple, and I couldn't even bring most. I have some things with me, but opportunities and ways for people in our communities, as well as our legislators and others, to get a hold of various different resources. For instance, how do you go about becoming a shellfish grower? Or this is a picture of an oyster. So there's folks working on oysters. And if you haven't seen, there's a oyster trail map that's kind of fun for looking at where these different opportunities have come up across the coast of Maine. So Dana's suggestions are, again, listening is big in terms of coming up with solutions-oriented decisions. So thinking about regular communications, and this is something in terms of building trust and really connecting with the community. The extension staff have the opportunity, they're there and they can continue those relationships. As researchers, when we kind of fly into a community and do research and leave, it can really leave that community wondering what happened and where that information went, and is it useful to them? So communicating that back to them could be useful for various different solutions. In terms of co-production practices, he emphasized roles again, being willing to maybe have contracts so that up front people know what their roles are, and then also being willing to share expertise from various different perspectives. Effective ways to work together to combine knowledge, again, aligning goals and objectives. And then the themes, again, these words resonated with Dana, but again, having more people, again, relationships and having more people contribute to an understanding of what a solution might be. I actually threw this in here because both Dana and the next person I'll talk about really highlighted the importance of communications. So we have a communications team. So you might know Catherine Schmidt as our science writer. She's here. And then we have a designer, Kathy TG, and Jenny Speckhard is our web and IT person. And really, this team of people have made information that's created by researchers as well as extension teams and requested by the people in terms of how they want to receive information. So whether that's in a newsletter form, a poster form, kiosks by the waterside, and various different web accessible forms, this is really makes a difference for the people in our coastal communities. So I think this is another fact sheet that we have that explains the Aquaculture and Shared Waters project. So having this team of people really enables us to get the word out, to take the research that we're doing here at the University of Maine or other research institutions across the state out to the people and into those communities, so they know that how they might be able to access people and make a difference in their communities on the This is Carrie Kazor. So she spent about 15 years working on Maine Healthy Beaches. So they were looking at water quality issues at beaches. This is also a project that's been turned over to Maine Department of Environmental Protection. That's another thing in the extension team role. We like to develop a project and get it going, and then hopefully it continues on into the future, and we have other partners kind of take those on and continue them. So Maine DEP is continuing the Healthy Beaches project, while Carrie has moved on to become the coordinator of the Alliance for Maine's Marine Economy. And that work that she's doing now is really to help enhance the infrastructure and workforce development for the Maine seafood economy, including sustainable fisheries and aquaculture sectors. And you can't see this very well, but there's 20 different organizations across the state who are involved in this project. So Carrie, when I asked her these questions, she said that to come up or get to solutions-oriented directions, again, comes back to David's point, their extension team are translating data and translating it into the user-friendly information and data visualization, hence the real utility of that communications team. For co-production practices, she mentioned refreshments again, providing snacks, get people to the table, and also be clear on expectations. So again, coming back to roles and maybe identifying on paper what everybody, how people will be engaged with one another. And then in terms of the use of themes, these themes did resonate for Carrie in terms of understanding projects at various scales, using local knowledge to really understand recommendations, and in terms of boundary spanning, thinking about watersheds at various different levels and coming together around shared goals in such situations. This is Kristen Grant. So I mentioned her too. She's at the Wells Reserve, so she's our southern counterpart. And she does a lot of work, at least most recently, she actually started doing finfish work as well. But most recently, she's been and working in the area of strengthening facilitation skills. And she's had multiple workshops where she's engaged municipal officials, and actually over the last year, over 50 municipal leaders to help them build up their facilitation skills and thinking about how communities interact with one another and then come up with solutions, potentially even under conflicting scenarios. So Kristen has been doing this work along with other work, including looking at shoreline access for Maine citizens. So she's done work and really taken on looking at research with the Law Center in southern Maine in terms of thinking about shoreline access and beach profiling and various different projects on the southern coast of Maine. And one of the things that So I again asked Kristen her thoughts on these solutions-oriented directions. And again, she said before any research or any project of any kind begins, identify the stakeholders and connect them, work directly with them to develop the project from the ground up. And her, I think some of her emphasis here was to recognize that everyone's knowledge is valuable and not to bring one up higher than anybody else's in the discussions and implementation of projects. And then, so she says, to effectively work together, you need to equally value all contributions of diverse stakeholders. Obviously this says included in the attached, but Kristen had the opportunity, she took a sabbatical and went to the Netherlands for some time and worked with some folks there, and I brought this if anybody's interested, but all of the themes that we're mentioning really come out in this document, where she was talking to folks there about planning for flood defense in the Netherlands, and then how that might relate to what will be happening here in Maine. But I was reading through that, and I was struck by some of the quotes in there, and I thought I'd read one of them to you, is that an academic from the Netherlands said, do not start with the solution and decide how to get there. Start from values. First, find out what are key stakeholder values and what are your own, then find common values. So that's some of the lessons learned from stakeholder engagement in these various different opportunities. So again, if you're interested in this, I have a few copies here. Natalie Springle. So Natalie is at the College of the Atlantic, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things that that Natalie does. So Natalie this is another way to reach out to our coastal communities. Natalie does a monthly radio program on WERU. And the one that's coming up in October, I have listed here the topic. But it's a way for us to reach out and get information about research and other opportunities that are happening within Maine Sea Grant and the state of Maine to coastal communities. Another piece to just mention, I really put this up here, Natalie and multiple other extension agents have been involved in the Down East Fisheries Trail. And again, fabulous map, if anybody wants some, I brought some with me. So just thinking about where might you go along the coast to learn some information about the history of fisheries in Maine. And one of the things I didn't ask Natalie the questions that I had asked everyone else because she was traveling. But I had seen Natalie give a talk, and this was one of her slides, and so it hit me that she was talking about a very interdisciplinary opportunity or things that the extension team works on, thinking about fisheries and aquaculture and also tourism and how the three sectors actually come together. And just in terms of hitting home, what does extension do? This is Natalie's quote for our role, the extension team, is to help sectors better understand each other and work collaboratively to solve problems. So it's really in the fabric of what extension does. So I want to end up, these are again quotes, but one of the last things in that list of things to think about in terms of sustainability solutions or sustainability problems is this idea of, the question was, do you use the theme honest broker? I can't say how much we use the theme honest broker, and it's very important to everyone. So I thought I'd put up here some of the quotes that I received back from the various extension team members. So one is that the role is basically to provide science-based information and facilitate a productive discussion so that people can make informed decisions. And again, I have a quote from Chris that I didn't put up here that I thought would be useful to mention. He said, "I remember assisting the Cobscook Bay Fishermen's Association for months with drafting legislation for scallop management. And when the time came to present the bill to the legislature, a few fishermen got miffed that I would not be providing testimony in favor of the bill. Other fishermen understood that advocacy was not my part of my job as an honest broker. Clearly defining roles and responsibilities early in the process greatly helps to avoid any misperceptions that can impede sustainability efforts." So I think that's really important in terms of the extension team really is out there to try to provide information on all sides of an issue and really put that information out there for people to make decisions around that information. Someone said I can't say enough about the importance of establishing and maintaining the trust, and the honest broker is part of that. This one's interesting. I think it's important. Honest broker is an improvement over neutral convener because most people have at least some level of bias. So putting that out there is important too. And in terms of the theme of wicked problems, these are complicated problems. So certainly that's something that resonated with the team. And then finally, I think Kristen was the one who said, "I may use these terms in my own thinking, but I don't use them with stakeholders." So that might be an important piece to take home. So in terms of themes for solving problems with coastal communities is our clear communication, listening, defining roles, and as being that honest broker, putting that up front, defining expectations, creating a safe space of understanding, and starting with those who will be affected or have the problem is really a good place to start. So what I would say is let's get engaged. This is our extension staff. We really and our team, and really it's an opportunity for us as researchers in the state of Maine. We have people who are not only boots on the ground, but have their ear to the ground in these communities and really understand what the issues are. So please reach out to them because they can help you identify research questions that will really make a difference for the people in these communities. And so I would like, as the new director of Maine Sea Grant, to see more of that exchange. So having the knowledge of that extension staff and those communities feeding back to the research here at UMaine and other research institutes in the state, and vice versa. So reach out if you have good information that you think that our coastal communities need. We have an opportunity to get that information out there. So what is the future for Maine Sea Grant? And actually I should point out before I go any further that Rusty reminds me. So this is an undergraduate student working on our tidal power project. And one of the things I haven't really mentioned that Maine Sea Grant does is we have a lot of opportunities for student research assistantships. And really, if for any students in the audience, stay tuned for opportunities as they come up. There are really, at the national level, there are some very competitive and really positions that can position you well to go into to NOAA or other national opportunities. But for the future for Maine Sea Grant, again, I would like to see more of this research originating with people in coastal communities. And there will be some new funding opportunities. As I mentioned, our biennial call will be opening in January, but there are other opportunities, national strategic initiatives, that's what NSI stands for. And I'm looking for other opportunities within NSF. If any of you had seen, there's an interesting new opportunity called Coastlines and People, which is exactly what Sea Grant does, so I'm hoping we can plug into that in some way. We have some new staff. One of the people I didn't mention was Jacqueline Robidoux. She was, her picture said 2018, she just started. She's a seaweed extension specialist, so her work is focused on post-production of seaweed and how we get that to market. And we'll be hiring a new research coordinator. So as I mentioned, research, extension, outreach, and education. We have a coordinator who would be plugged into the national network of research coordinators. Staff on our radar include somebody to work more specifically in education, and potentially lobster extension. There's a big effort right now. The Department of Marine Resources has a lobster collaborative ongoing, and we'd like to help with some of that and the new invigoration of our Lobster Institute as part of our partnership around that as well. We have some new partnerships with Maine DMR around this lobster collaborative, and we're developing some new opportunities with NOAA Fisheries and Northeast Fisheries Science Center around diadromous fish. We just recently brought on some new members from our policy advisory committee. So we don't, Maine Sea Grant doesn't work in a vacuum. We have a policy advisory committee. We have 25 members. They are from multiple sectors across the state, and they represent folks from southern Maine to all the way to eastern Maine, and all different sectors. And some of the new ones that we brought in over this, these new members include land trusts, so they hadn't been at the table previously, municipalities, and some new aquaculture sectors. Finally, we, at the national level, National Sea Grant has multiple, I think it's 10 different visioning exercises going on. So we all work under the focus areas that I mentioned, but we're always looking into the future. So there are multiple visioning exercises that we've been pretty closely involved with, including a community science, used to be called citizen science, so it's a new initiative called community science, local and traditional ecological knowledge, aquaculture communications, and then more about this intersection between fisheries and aquaculture. So those are at the national level, and we're plugged into those networks to try to think about what is the vision of these different aspects in Maine, and then how does that link to the national efforts that are happening there. So with that, I thank you for your time, and hopefully can answer any of your questions. Yes.
You mentioned it briefly on the last slide, but can you talk a little bit more about how DMR and NOAA Fisheries and Sea Grant work together, like those three institutions?
Mm-hmm.
You sort of mentioned that there was some lobster collaboration, but sort of on a, I don't know.
Yeah, so we have I didn't mention, I was tempted to put up our list of partners, but it's pretty extensive, and hopefully you saw some of the logos mixed in there. But one of the relationship, they vary, right? So in some cases we're on grants together, in some cases we just convene with people. So a lot of when we facilitate discussions around things like the Lobster Collaborative, our extension staff are trained in facilitation. So we'll do that just with agencies like DMR if they have questions or a meeting that they want to facilitate. But the relationship here is bringing on our research coordinator. We are expecting there to be some research going on around lobster, and so we want and DMR brought on a person too, so we're hoping to get them to think across lines more.
Do you ever find that there are mixed messages coming from the different organizations and that can create issues sometimes, or is that not really?
No, those are the things that need to be set up front. So yeah, so there's definitely different missions and people have different expectations of what that would look like, and we always try to enter into those discussions as we'll be this neutral or honest party, kind of managing expectations in a room, especially around if it's a facilitated event, and not take sides necessarily.
Nobody else has a question? Can you just say a little bit more about the Policy Advisory Committee
Mm-hmm.
and what that does and kind of what you're learning about how well it works?
So the Policy Advisory Committee is meant to help maintain relevance of what we're doing as a whole. So we bring to them, our reporting for the year, and they help us build our strategic plan so that the focus areas that we look at from a national perspective, how do those apply in Maine? And then thinking about moving into this time of research opportunities, thinking about what areas might we focus on. And I'm still, my first meeting with my PAC will be at the end of November. So I'm excited to have just open discussion from a different perspective, all the different sectors bringing issues to the table so we can see what are the things that people are thinking about. So as much as we have a lot of partnerships and we have the team on the ground, we certainly don't talk to everyone. So we try to fill in some of those gaps with the Policy Advisory Committee as well.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Well, I'm hoping that Gayle can hang around if you want to come up and talk at the end, but let's thank her right now for a great